We're joined now by CBS News political contributor and Democratic strategist Lynda Tran and Joseph Pinion. He is here, and he's a Republican strategist. Good to see you both.
Good to be here.
All right, so Joseph, Republicans, how concerned are they at the momentum that the Biden campaign seems to have?
Honestly, I think that it remains to be seen if he does have true momentum. I think right now you look at the fact that any delegate that goes to somebody not named Joe Biden is a victory for Bernie Sanders. And I think people have made so much of the fact that Democrats have these proportional delegates being allocated as to why Bernie can't pull away. They don't seem to realize it's also why it's very difficult for somebody to try to catch him. And so when you look at it from that perspective, with Bernie Sanders seemingly still going to be able to do very well in places like California, and Texas, and Massachusetts, where he's actually probably leading Elizabeth Warren if polls are to be believed. Again, it makes it very difficult if you have somebody like Bloomberg who starts hitting the viability threshold in California, in Texas, to make it possible for Joe Biden to catch him.
So to that point, Lynda, let us talk about California. Bernie Sanders is polling really well in California, but on the flip side, Biden tends to do much better with minority voters than Sanders does. And when you talk about California, you have to talk about the Hispanic vote. So can you sort of break down the Golden State to us?
Well, first off, we're talking about the biggest piece of the pie for today, 1357 delegates that are in contention, and California alone accounts for 415 of those. There's no question that Bernie Sanders has had a lot of strength and the narrative on his side up until now, and in particular with a large Latino community as part of the electorate there, that is definitely a point of strength for Bernie Sanders. However, as you point out, Anne-Marie, the former Vice President Joe Biden has been extraordinarily strong in the African-American community, which will certainly be in contention. And as we look at the way that these delegates are going to be allocated in districts, in communities where there's a large African-American electorate, Joe Biden is going to have the opportunity to post some pretty big gains there and hopefully keep within striking distance of Bernie Sanders. But, California alone is not everything. It's not the full ball game today. And we have heard from the vice president's campaign that they're looking at hopefully making a win in Texas, which is another 200 and some odd delegates that are in play today.
Joseph, why do you think the president oftentimes in his tweets, in his comments that he makes at his rallies, seems to champion or to cheer on Bernie Sanders over some of the other Democrats in the field? Is it because, what do you think it is?
Honestly, I think it's because the president knows what many people know, which is that many of the people that voted for him in 2016, their first choice was Bernie Sanders. We forget again that close to 10% of the people that voted for Bernie Sanders in that primary turned around and voted for President Trump in the general. And so I think that on some basic level, he has a level of respect for Bernie Sanders because he understands that they're pulling from that same pool of voters in some respects. So I think, again, it's hard to say what the president's trying to do. This morning he went on a tweet storm about Mike Bloomberg, and as I said earlier, I mean, it would seem like it would behoove him to get people to have voted for Mike Bloomberg because, again, every time he hits that delegate threshold, every time that Mike Bloomberg is coming away with delegates, the only way Mike Bloomberg is realistically going to be the nominee is through a brokered convention process, which means that Democrats would have to have Bernie Sanders walk in with the most delegates and walk out without the nomination. And if that happens, they might not just have to kiss 2020 goodbye. The party might be in complete and absolute rubble.
Lynda, as we watch Super Tuesday unfold, do you think that we really won't know if there's two candidates standing until the very, very end? What I'm trying to get at is, could we see the candidate that's taking the lead, could we see that ebb and flow as we move further and further west until we get to California? I know that, Vice President Biden was really banking on the African-American vote in South Carolina, and it worked out for him, but he has a long and rich relationship in South Carolina. I don't know if he can repeat that as, when we're talking about Virginia and other states as we sort of go from east to west.
Well, I think that we are going to have a much clearer picture of what the field looks like at the end of the night tonight. That doesn't mean that we wouldn't ultimately end up with some sort of a brokered convention, as Joseph mentioned, but the field is going to continue to narrow. And I think we cannot discount the long-standing relationship that voters all around the country, outside of South Carolina, feel that they have with the vice president. I mean, this is Uncle Joe to millions of Americans who have known him over the the more than 4 decades of public service that he's committed to this country. I think a lot of people who were sitting back on the sidelines and may have originally thought about casting their ballots for some of the other more moderate candidates in the field who have now stepped aside feel like they have the ability to stand with him now and feel like they can be part of something now that he's got the wind at his back after coming off of such a strong win in South Carolina and having so many sitting elected leaders stand with him now.
You know, Lynda, I want to ask you a question too, and I'm curious about the comments that Senator Sanders has made on the campaign trail, where he seems to suggest that not just the Republican establishment is afraid of him, but the Democratic establishment. And I think back to 2018, and you were here with us, and we were on set talking about the midterm elections. And before the date of the election, there were some who thought that progressives were going to do well, that those establishment candidates were out of step with the mood of the Democratic Party, which is that it is much more progressive, as represented by Elizabeth Warren and Senator Sanders. And yet, when the midterms, when the night was over, all the establishment candidates had won their elections. And so that proved to not be true in the midterms. And I wonder, what would it mean for the general if really the mood of the country is not as progressive as some would like to suggest, and that perhaps some people are looking at Joe Biden as a representation of a return to normalcy, for better or for worse. I'm not here to argue policy or because I don't have a position on that. I'm just trying to get a sense of, when you look at the polling numbers and when you talk to voters, how they feel about the direction of the country. Is it as represented by Senator Sanders and his supporters, or are there more people, those who perhaps voted for President Trump and Barack Obama, who might think that Joe Biden is a more viable candidate?
You know, Vlad, you raised such an important point, because I think that too often we can get caught up in the Twitterverse and the back and forth among the more progressive folks who happen to be online talking about some of these more quote-unquote revolutionary policies that Senator Bernie Sanders represents and that he's been promoting to the world. But, you know, as I've been traveling around this country, the vast majority of individuals that I talk to are tired of the turmoil. They're tired of all the chaos that has come out of the Trump White House. And what they're really looking for is what you're saying, a return to normalcy, a sense of calm, and the ability to focus on those kitchen table issues and the things that affect their daily lives without there being lots of controversy and some idea of potential corruption coming out of Washington, D.C. They don't want to focus on that at all. And Joe Biden represents, in a lot of ways, a period of time where, you know, there was a lot of economic prosperity. We had been brought back from the brink of another great recession, and somebody who's been able to get things done over many decades of service.
All right, Lynda, Joe,
Really
thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.